that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil here on GB News on this Good Friday. And it's a very busy Good Friday, let me tell you that.
Yes, of course, it's the big Easter getaway, but as ever, there's travel chaos left, right and centre. Let's see how Dover's looking right now. There it is. Oh, blimey. You wouldn't want to be in that queue on the far side, would you? Yeah, that's the chaos that our reporter Theo Chicumba is there, and we'll get the latest from him at around 10:20.
But first, it's Good Friday, so events are being held to mark the 25th anniversary of the signing of the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. But overnight, police in Northern Ireland have warned of potential dissident public disorder over Easter. Our reporter, Catherine Forster, will bring us the latest on this. Plus, discuss why Labour has got itself into hot water over a scathing Twitter post aimed at Rishi Sunak.
Also ahead, just days after The Guardian admitted its founder had links to the cotton slave trade, the newspaper's now trying to cancel the royal family for their past involving slavery. We'll be speaking to Dr. David Starkey.
And as ever this morning, we want to hear from you, especially if you're stuck in a queue, in a car, when you thought you were getting away from Easter. So get involved in the show. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. And if you send us a video, we will play them out.
But make sure you're in the passenger seat.
Precisely.
Not if you're driving. No, I don't want anyone driving sending their videos
Yes,
in.
but if they're not moving, they're not moving. But before all of that, here's your latest headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Esther, thank you very much and good morning. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Police in Northern Ireland are warning their officers could be targeted by dissidents in Londonderry this Easter. That's ahead of a state visit by US President Joe Biden arriving in Belfast on Tuesday. The PSNI says it's received strong intelligence attacks are being planned for Bank Holiday Monday. MI5 raised the terrorism threat level in the country to severe following the shooting of senior detective John Caldwell. Political commentator Nigel Nelson told us Northern Ireland has seen relative peace over a quarter of a century, showing what an achievement the agreement was.
When it comes to Republican supporters, there are probably about as many in Northern Ireland now as there were during the Troubles. The new IRA doesn't have the capability of, say, launching mainland attacks. But they're obviously, as we can see by the various attacks they've carried out in Northern Ireland, they're hugely dangerous. So, yes, it is a tricky time, but it's a lot better than it was 25 years ago.
A 12-year-old boy has been charged with the murder of a woman who died after being hit by a car. 60-year-old Marcia Grant was hit in the Greenhill area of Sheffield on Wednesday evening. South Yorkshire Police have said the boy, who cannot be identified for legal reasons, will appear before Sheffield Youth Court tomorrow. The Labour Party has stood by an ad claiming that Rishi Sunak doesn't think child sex abusers should go to prison. The advert, posted on Twitter, has drawn criticism from MPs. Senior Tory ministers accused the party of a vile and desperate campaign strategy. Labour posted the ad pitching itself as the party of law and order. But Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell told GB News it's similar to the types of graphics the PM uses.
The digital graphic that's based on, it's like a skit, if you like, or a take on the types of graphics that the Prime Minister himself produces about his own policies, and he's become famous for producing these kind of graphics. And so it's a take on that. If it's personal in the sense that he's the guy who runs the country. He is the Prime Minister, and the book does stop with him.
2 million British holidaymakers are expected to head overseas this Easter weekend. Travel organisation ABTA says people are seeking sunshine, booking trips to places like Spain, Greece and the Canaries. Data company Cirium says more than 10,000 flights are scheduled to leave the UK, 13% below pre-pandemic travel. Meanwhile, the Port of Dover is warning holidaymakers could face 2-hour delays this Easter weekend. Ferry operator DFDS urged travellers to allow 120 minutes to complete border controls and check-in. Delays have been blamed on French officials carrying out extra checks as well as stamping UK passports following Brexit. A man has been arrested on suspicion of murder after one person died during a fire at a block of flats in East London. The Met Police said officers were called to the blaze in Newham, along with the London Ambulance Service and Fire Brigade. The victim, believed to be a woman, has not been named. 5 others were taken to hospital following the fire. Police said investigations are still ongoing. Protesters continued to demonstrate in Paris against the proposed pension bill. Demonstrators set fire to one of President Emmanuel Macron's favourite restaurants and clashed with riot police. Crowds have been gathering since January against the reform, which would lift the retirement age by 2 years to 64. Union leaders warn the only way out of the crisis is for the legislation to be withdrawn. Israel's military hit sites in Gaza early this morning in retaliation for rocket attacks it blamed on the Islamist group Hamas. Video released by the Israeli army shows explosions on what it said were 10 targets, including Hamas weapon production sites and tunnels. The military said 34 rockets were launched from Lebanon, of which 25 were intercepted by defence systems. The Lionesses beat Brazil 4-2 in a dramatic penalty shootout last night, winning the women's Finalissima. The game finished 1-1 before Chloe Kelly scored the winning goal in front of an 83,000-strong crowd at Wembley Stadium. The women's football team are now undefeated in 30 matches. Easter Sunday could be the warmest day of the year so far, with highs of up to 18 degrees. Temperatures could top 16 or 17 degrees Celsius in some parts of the UK today, as the sun puts its hat on for Easter. The Met Office says the weather is set to be fine and relatively nice this weekend, before rain for most places on Bank Holiday Monday. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Esther and Phil.
Thank you, Tatiana. Now, the Labour Party have tweeted up a storm this bank holiday. Last night, they posted a tweet saying, under the Tories, 4,500 adults convicted of sexually assaulting children under 16 serve no prison time, saying that the Prime Minister doesn't want to send those people, those offenders, to prison.
But first, as events mark the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, the police say it has received strong intelligence of planned terror attacks against its officers.
It's a real concern when President Biden is due to visit next week. For more on both of our top stories, joining us in the studio is GB News political reporter Catherine Forster. Catherine, thank you for joining us. Front page of the Daily Telegraph today about the IRA terror threat fear ahead of the Biden visit. It's quite specific what the police have said, isn't it? Is this unusual to be specific about the date, who the target's going to be? It's going to be the police on Easter Monday. It seems very unusual to me.
It is unusual, and they're saying they've got very strong community intelligence, targets police officers specifically on Easter Monday, which, of course, is the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, and specifically in Londonderry. So very, very specific. I suppose the hope is that in putting this out there very publicly now, they're trying to send a message to whoever may be planning, whatever they're planning, that they're on to them, and so not to try. But clearly they do have intelligence. And, of course, it's not long since MI5 raised the terror threat level to severe in Northern Ireland, which means that an attack is highly likely. So not a great backdrop for this huge moment, this anniversary of 25 years of largely peace in Northern Ireland.
And Easter weekend's always a busy weekend anyway. There's always some kind of marches, events going on. But now it's a much bigger weekend, 30 years, I should say, since the Good Friday Agreement. And then visitors from around the world.
Yes, absolutely. Easter, the Easter parades commemorate the Easter Rising of 1916 against British rule in Ireland. So it's always a busy time. But, of course, we have this huge anniversary coming up on Monday. And then President Biden is arriving on Tuesday. Also, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak arriving. They will be meeting. There are events planned. Obviously, there's going to be phenomenally tight security for that. Biden won't be speaking at Stormont, understandably, of course, because there is no devolved government in Stormont at the moment. And Jerry Adams, former Sinn Féin leader, has been saying that would be like, going to a wake because it's an empty building. So huge security. And then President Biden is going to be in the Republic of Ireland from Wednesday onwards, and Bill Clinton is also visiting at some point. I'm not sure of his exact time frame.
Massive security operation, isn't it?
Huge, yes.
But the tweet that has got Labour into hot water there, Catherine.
Yes, a huge backlash against this tweet that Labour put out late yesterday, not just from Conservatives, right across the spectrum.
And we're looking at it now if you're watching TV.
Saying, do you think adults convicted of sexually assaulting children should go to prison? Rishi Sunak doesn't. And then his signature, they're sort of ripping off, if you like, the very slick ads that he often used to put out with his branding in pink. But of course, they're pointing out the failure of the criminal justice system, if you like, since 2010. But they're doing it extremely personally. Now, Rishi Sunak has only been Prime Minister not even 6 months. He only became an MP in 2015. These figures go back to 2010, when he was working in investment banking. So it's a very personal, targeted attack. And clearly it's inaccurate. I mean, come
Are
on.
they taking it down? Are they saying anything?
They
or are they
haven't-
standing firm and doubling down?
They haven't apologised at all. They haven't taken it down, despite the fact that Twitter have now put a explanatory note underneath it. Lucy Powell, the shadow...
What, Twitter have done that, and not the Labour Party?
Twitter have done... It says, tweet implies that PM Rishi Sunak doesn't support prison sentences for sexual assaults against children.
I just thought it was interesting. Twitter had done that. All I'm saying was interesting. Twitter is policing the internet there, but Labour isn't doing it themselves.
So
I think that's very interesting.
Twitter clearly believe this is misleading, and clearly it is misleading. Even somebody like former Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell has said, take this down, Labour is better than this. And, you know, the accusations of dog whistle politics that we had at the beginning of the week about the grooming gangs, this very much looks just the same, doesn't it? Dog whistle politics from the Labour Party this time.
But it's drawn attention to the issue, so in that sense it's been successful, hasn't it?
Yeah, true.
Catherine Forster, thank you very much indeed for the latest there. Now, King Charles has signalled his support for research into the monarchy's links with the slave trade for the first time.
An American historian recently unearthed a document revealing one of his predecessors had shares in a transatlantic slaving firm.
Joining us now to discuss this is historian and broadcaster David Starkey. So, David, is this a good move for King Charles?
I think not for the first time. It's the height of folly. Also, it's 180 years late. What we forget is that the monarchy apologised fully, absolutely and eloquently for slavery in 1840, when Prince Albert, who's whatever Charles's great-great-great-grandfather, said, slavery is the desolation of Africa and the blackest stain on civilized Europe. You know, that's then. And also, what's interesting about it, Esther, is that's when we were doing something about it. Only 3 years before that, Britain had abolished the entire slave trade and slavery throughout the British Empire. The whole weight of the British Navy was being turned against slavery. And Britain is, remember, every country in the world has had slavery, right? Britain is unique in one thing: it abolished it. So Charles, I think, is making a profound mistake. It's something else, too. We do need research, but what we need real research in, Esther and Phil, is why nobody thought slavery was wrong in the 18th century, in the 17th century. You see, these people, the king the king in question who received those slaves, who received the investments in the Royal Africa Company, William III, was a moral Protestant king. The man who gave him those investments, Edward Colston, saw himself as an upright, charitable citizen and a Christian. They didn't think they were doing wrong. And what's extraordinary is, remember, there's nothing in the Bible that condemns slavery. There really isn't. St. Paul talks about slavery, but he says, you know, slaves should behave well to their masters and their masters should behave well to their slaves. And by the way, in the sight of God, we're all equal. But he doesn't say anything about abolishing slavery. So the really big question is, why suddenly, in the late 18th century, only in Britain, the movement begins to say slavery is wrong? See, there's a moral revolution. And why we get the past so wrong is we think they think the same as we do.
Are we right to be bringing this up now, going back to that past? What will come of this? What are they hoping will come of this?
Look, I mean, what I think the ideal would be some sort of reconciliation, but we saw the business of Ngozi Fulani in the palace. The palace reaches out to these people, and what do? They just want to make as much trouble as possible. What the monarchy should be, what Charles should be saying is, this is an episode in our past which Britain solved within its past. In other words, this is not a running sore. We don't have slaves. By the way, there are slaves in Africa. There are slaves in China. There are slaves throughout the entire Arab world. We, on the contrary, have pioneered to destroy it. But the interesting question, Esther, is why we've changed, why we now think it's disgraceful. And what King Charles should be doing is looking at the part his ancestors played in that. A king that he's very keen on, George III, plays in the late 18th century, plays a leading part in the invention of this word humane. In other words, becoming, kind, charitable, not torturing, not injuring, not enslaving.
David, just very quickly, if you can, because we need to go to a break, but is there a sign that the royal family are sort of going a bit woke, not just with this, but with William and Kate appointing Jacinda Ardern to their Earthshot Prize board? Is there a danger that the royal family are sort of lurching here into the political spectrum and lurching to the left?
I think they're making a profound, I think you're right. I think they're making a profound error. I use the phrase, it began with William the Conqueror. It might end with William the Woke. Because there's one thing for certain, woke people do not support the monarchy. So the monarchy, by these kind of gestures, is losing the people that watch GB News, that support the monarchy, and trying to court the favour of the Guardian that fundamentally hates it. So it's not only bad history, it's bad politics. Is that brief enough for you?
It is. Dr. David Starkey, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it, as always. Thank you. Now, coming up, we'll be heading over to Dover next to catch up with our reporter, Theo Chikomba. You don't want to miss seeing those queues.
Or maybe you do.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil. It's 10:21 now. Last weekend, the Port of Dover declared a critical incident because of queues of coaches waiting over 15 hours to board ferries. Traffic jams are expected to get even worse today due to major railway works.
Meanwhile, an estimated 2 million British holidaymakers are heading overseas this Easter weekend. That's an 11% increase compared with last year.
Well, our national reporter, Theo Chicomba, joins us now from Dover. So, Theo, what's the latest where you are in Dover?
Yes, good morning. Well, there are plenty of queues here just at the entrance of the Port of Dover. To my left, there's police presence there. They are actually stopping cars coming in and lorries at the same time so that there isn't a pile-up inside the Port of Dover. Now, this week, in comparison to last week, the port management say less coaches will be coming into the port over the weekend, essentially staggering them so they don't see similar scenes that we saw last weekend when many coaches were sitting in the port for hours on end, not knowing when they'll be going in for processing. Today, though, the French border authorities say more officials are on shift to help the processing, particularly when it comes to outbound passengers who'll be making their journeys today. Many people across the UK travelling to see family and friends as part of their Easter holiday plans, and a lot of them are unfortunately sitting in traffic at the moment. Particularly the Irish ferries, they've said passengers can expect delays of around 2 to 3 hours when they come to Calais, and they're advising people not to come very early as they might find themselves in traffic with those who are also coming early, and it ends up just a situation where everybody is sitting in traffic. So people are being advised not to come too early, but come when they need to. Just outside of the Port of Dover, when it comes to railway networks, Network Rail say engineering works will be taking place across this weekend. So many people looking to travel by train, for example, are being advised to check ahead of their travel. They say they obviously wouldn't want to make people's journeys difficult, but this is a time, particularly when people aren't relying on trains as much to go to work, for example. So that's why they are doing engineering works this weekend. And for those who are looking to fly at Heathrow Terminal 5, there's still strikes going on there. Security staff, members of the Unite Union, have been striking for almost a week now and be finishing this weekend. So again, people can expect delays, and they are also being advised to check before they travel. But here at the Port of Dover, it's busy as ever, as you may be able to see on my left shoulder as well, lorries and cars coming into the port.
Theo Chicomba, thank you very much indeed for bringing us the latest from Dover. You'll keep us updated with all those queues as the day progresses. I think they're going to get worse, aren't they, as the day progresses?
Well, not only that, I think they say over Easter weekend there'll be 17 million leisure trips. People will be going out in the car, but they said research showed that only 19% of people check their car before they go out. So they're saying if you're going to be caught in queues, check your car works, you don't want unnecessary breakdowns, and check you've got some food and something to drink. Do you check your car when you go out?
No, I don't. No, but
I'm not, you see, you're one of those.
I'm not driving to France, though, am I?
But even if you don't, if you're just driving around, you should check your car, check everything's fine. Do a little check.
No,
my dad's keen on that.
Man,
hot on that.
Nagged already. It's only 10:25. I'm being nagged already.
That's marriage for you.
Tell
that's
me
what you said, to have and to hold, to be nagged forever this day forward.
So, you don't need to tell me that. Anyway, earlier this week, the Conservative MP for Blackpool South, Scott Benton, had his party whip suspended after he got caught up in a lobbying for money undercover sting by The Times.
Amongst other things, the MP said he was prepared to lobby ministers and to put parliamentary questions forward in return for financial reward.
What you may or may not know is that The Times, in fact, ran an attempted sting operation on none other than me. But I, along with our GB News Investigates reporter, Charlie Peters, saw through it, and yes, we tried to out-sting the stingers.
But what people might not know, and because you got the letter and I've had one in previous years, just sort of explain what happened to you? You sort of get a letter. Go on, explain and what it says.
Well, I received a letter from this company which was purporting to be called TAR Partners, and they said that they were looking to... they've got £340 million of assets for a very rich family in India, and they were looking to expand their investments in the UK. And one of the sectors they were looking at expanding into was the gambling industry, and they wanted to employ somebody as a consultant and who could help them through the political and regulatory issues that sector faces, and that I'd been identified as somebody who might be able to do that work for them, and they offered me a job for...
Well, and you showed, and we were looking at this...
2 days a week.
We were looking at this letter, so what a load of rubbish this letter is.
Well, I replied and said, look, A, MPs can't lobby for companies, B, MPs can't give parliamentary advice for payment, and C, I'm not interested in a job. But you might not want to meet me, but if you do, I will do. And they said, well, we still want to meet you.
Right, and so that in itself, I'm not interested in a job. I can't do the job. But they said, we still want to see you anyway. So
we decided to
alarm bells go off.
So we decided to film and record the conversation. They were filming me and I was filming them.
Yes. And that was really important. But equally, it just shows that you've got to be alert when... I guess maybe in any job, but MPs, people are always trying to sort of catch you out in one way or another. I'm not saying woe is me. I'm just saying that's what happens.
I know.
But anyway...
Scott Benton is now in the eye of a media storm,
He's in the eye of a media storm, and he's had the whip removed. So joining us now is former MP for Tiverton and Honiton, Neil Parish, who knows a thing or two about being in the eye of a storm and being suspended and what it's like when you're in the centre of a media frenzy. So... Neil, can you really understand what Scott will be going through today? He's been front page of the papers. People are covering the story. He's in the newspapers again today. What will Scott be going through?
Well, good morning to both of you. He'll feel very isolated, and so, I mean, all right, he partly his own fault for he should not have been doing that, as you've quite rightly said. At the end of the day, we are as MPs elected to do a job, but when the media come after you, they come after you with force, and of course you're entirely surrounded, and you feel very much alone. And I think one of the issues I had with mine was, mine was self-inflicted. It wasn't corruption. It was just stupidity, and a very wrong thing to do. But, you do actually need some help through the whole situation regarding it, from the party. But, of course, the moment the whip is suspended, you are absolutely on your own. And, of course, that's what he will be feeling. But, of course, it also gives you a great deal of time to reflect on what you've done as well.
And now I get, I understand that your whip's removed, but is there no help or support from the party? No sort of, support from anybody, like, human resources in a way? Because this is separate. This is your life absolutely being exposed. This is difficulty for your family, for friends, and for your staff who work for you. So is there nothing?
Yeah. No, nothing at all. And I think that's what I would say to all political parties, actually, is that, and I think, the trouble with politics is that we are all innocent until proven guilty. The moment that one of us is proven guilty, the rest of the MPs just run for cover. And that's the nature of politics. It doesn't matter which political party you're in. But I think the actual sort of the system within the party, within the parties and within the Conservative Party should actually just have a little bit of care, because at the end of the day, it's your mental state, it's your family, it's everything else that you have to deal with, and I think that's what Scott's having to deal with now. And yes, he's done wrong, and he needs to answer it, and it will be investigated. But in that meantime, you do actually need some care through it. I was in a terrible state at the time, and like I said, nothing came from the party and nothing since. And so therefore, I'm afraid, it's not the way to deal with people.
Neil, when you say a terrible state, what sort of state are you talking about? When you say you're in a terrible state, what sort of things going through your head?
Well, Esther, I don't have to spell it out on GB News as to what one might have not have done to oneself when one has seen a very good political career just blown up in front of your face. down to my own stupidity, but also down to my colleagues who were sort of ditching the dirt on me were far from innocent. So, I mean, it's just crazy. And I don't, there's no point in me being moral about anything. I don't intend to be moral about anything. I can't be. But like I said, what I will do, and say in all honesty to you, is that there needs to be a system of help through the whole process. And actually, you'd have less trouble and probably not so many whips suspended if this was looked at. And also, I mean, Scott was obviously touting himself around. Surely the whips knew that. Why weren't they doing something about it to stop it, you see? And then when it all blows up, then the whips and everybody else, oh, dear, 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 it's terrible. But, the idea of a whipping operation, it should be there to actually care for the individual and try and stop them going off the rails. But in Scott's case, it certainly didn't happen, did it?
No. Neil, thank you very much indeed for joining us and sharing your experience as well in the eye of being a political figure in the eye of a media storm and trying to give us an insight into what Scott Benton might be feeling like over the last couple of days. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Still ahead with local election nominations now closed, we'll be speaking to the polling guru, Professor Sir John Curtis, to guide us through it. Now, though, let's get the latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Esther, thank you very much and good morning. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Police in Northern Ireland are warning their officers could be targeted by dissidents in Londonderry this Easter. That's ahead of a state visit by US President Joe Biden arriving in Belfast on Tuesday. The PSNI says it's received strong intelligence attacks are being planned for Bank Holiday Monday. MI5 raised the terrorism threat alert in the country to severe following the shooting of senior detective John Caldwell. The Labour Party has stood by an ad claiming that Rishi Sunak doesn't think child sex abusers should go to prison. The advert, posted by the party on Twitter, has drawn criticism from MPs. Senior Tory ministers accused Labour of a vile and desperate campaign strategy. The UK has appealed for de-escalation as Israel's military hit sites in Gaza early this morning. It's in retaliation for rocket attacks it blamed on the Islamist group Hamas. Video released by the Israeli army shows explosions on what it said were 10 targets, including Hamas weapon production sites and tunnels. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says both sides in the Israel-Palestine dispute should negotiate and de-escalate tensions. 2 million British holidaymakers are expected to head overseas this Easter weekend. Travel organisation ABTA says people are seeking sunshine, booking trips to places like Spain and Greece. Data company Cirium says more than 10,000 flights are scheduled to leave the UK, 13% below pre-pandemic travel. Temperatures could top 16 or 17 degrees Celsius in some parts of the UK today as the sun puts its hat on for Easter. The Met Office says the weather is set to be fine and relatively nice this weekend before rain for most places on Bank Holiday Monday. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2438 and 1.1396 euros. The price of gold is £1,615 and 9 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,741 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Thank you, Tatiana. You're watching Friday Morning with Esther and Phil. Coming up, we'll be getting to the heart of today's top stories with our brilliant presenters friends, Belinda DeLucci and Andy MacDonald.
But before that, we'll be looking ahead to those looming local May elections with Professor John Curtis. So see you in a few minutes.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil, however you're getting us, whether it's on radio or whether it's on your TV. Now, on Thursday, the 4th of May, much of the country will be going to the polls for the local elections.
Joining us now to discuss this is Professor Sir John Curtis, Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde and all-round polling expert and extraordinaire. John, thank you very much for joining us. Nominations have now closed for the local elections. I suppose before the results come out, the parties will be giving us all their management expectation of, trying to turn bad results into pretending that they're good results. So from an expert point of view, what would make good and bad results? What should we look out for in these elections for what would make good and bad results for particularly the two main parties?
Well, I think before I answer that direct question directly, Phil, the crucial thing to understand is what is actually up for grabs. And there are two things about that are crucial to understanding what might happen on the 4th of May. The first thing to note is that about 80 to 90% of the seats that are up for grabs were last contested in May 2019. Politically, that is prehistory. I probably need to do just to remind you, Theresa May was Prime Minister. Remember her? She was struggling and failing to get her Brexit deal through the House of Commons. And indeed, by this stage, she'd already had to concede the fact that we weren't going to be leaving in the spring of 2019. But in fact, we were going to have European elections, which in fact happened then 3 weeks after the 2019 local elections. The Conservatives were down to 26% in the opinion polls. However, the Labour Party wasn't doing that well either. It was only running at about 32% in the opinion polls because while the Conservatives were losing ground to the Brexit Party at that stage, Labour were also beginning to lose ground to the Liberal Democrats. So neither the Conservatives nor Labour did very well in the local elections 4 years ago. Both of them lost councils. They both of them lost seats. The second thing one needs to understand about the elections up for grabs this year is that the seats are disproportionately located in rural England. There's no elections going on in London. Not even all of provincial England has local elections, but much of rural Shire England does. And that, of course, is A, Tory heartland territory, but B, not areas where Labour are, in many cases, competitive. If there's a challenge to the Conservatives for control of the local council, it's more likely to come from the Democrats than it is from the Conservatives. Now, we put all this together. Well, actually, the Conservatives' position in opinion polls at the moment is slightly better than it was 4 years ago. They're running at 28% as opposed to the 26% of 4 years ago. So, the Conservatives are defending a poor baseline. So they're not necessarily going to lose that much. That said, however, Labour are in a stronger position than they were 4 years ago. They're about 14 points up. So we're looking, if the opinion polls are a reasonable guide, about a 6% swing from Conservative to Labour. Not that dramatic. Colin Rawlings and Michael Thrasher, local election experts, reckon that might result in about 1,000 seats going away from the Conservatives, and just over 8,000 being contested. I reckon that perhaps the Conservatives might lose maybe a dozen councils, probably no more than 20, and that Labour may not pick up much more than around 10 or so. Because again, bear in mind that the Liberal Democrats, while they given where they are the challengers, Liberal Democrats are still pretty much in the doldrums in the opinion polls. They did rather well in 2019, as I suggested earlier. So they're having to defend rather a high baseline. Put all this together, well, yes, Labour should make gains, but not enormous gains. Certainly not very much in the way of headline-grabbing gains of councils, maybe Stoke, maybe Darlington, maybe Erewater, one or two red wall type-ish areas. The Conservatives will make some losses, but not dramatic losses. And so unless, in other words, you understand the backdrop to these elections, just be aware the Conservatives will try to tell you this is so difficult, we're in a bad position in the opinion polls. And then when they don't lose too much, they'll try to persuade us they haven't done that badly. Well, maybe, maybe not. Labour, meanwhile, will be saying, well, we don't necessarily always do well in that local elections, don't necessarily expect too much. And then when they do modestly well, they'll try to claim a prize. So you're right, there'll be a lot of spinning, but the spinning this time will be against a backdrop which is actually quite crucial to remember. And just remember, we're not comparing with 2019, a general election. We're comparing with local elections that took place 8 months previously, where the political context was very, very different from what it was at the time of the 2019 general election.
And John, just quickly, if you can, how big a guide will these elections be to what might happen in a general election, or are local elections becoming more local? And just if you could also just briefly touch on what impact will the new voter ID regulations have on these results, if any?
Okay, two other points to note in the first part of your question. One of the reasons why the Conservatives are still only at 28% in the opinion polls is that about 6% of people say they're going to vote for Reform UK. There are fewer than 500 candidates standing for reform in these local elections. That might well help the Conservatives, as is also the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, Euroscepticism was pretty popular back in 2019. It's not as popular as it was now. So that's one thing to bear in mind as to why things may not necessarily work out as we might expect from the opinion polls. The other thing we have to remember, Labour never do as well in local elections as their current poll standing. The Liberal Democrats always do better. So you certainly can't just simply take the numbers and add them up and say, well, this is what would happen in the general election. You have to compare local election results with local election results. The voter ID, well, it's certainly deeply controversial. Not necessarily because it's a bad idea if you compare British elections by international standards. Most countries require ID. But rather that many people argue there isn't a problem, at least on this side of the Irish Sea, about personation. Very few people get prosecuted for it. And B, shall we say, some of the decisions to be made about what will or not be accepted as ID have looked a little bit controversial, not least the idea that a young person's bus pass won't count, but an older person's bus pass will. And of course, some people have noted that older people are much more likely than younger people to vote for the Conservatives. So it's perhaps unfortunate that the change has been introduced in a way that some people regard as rather partisan. But I think actually if we're thinking about...
Professor John Curtis, we're going to have to draw this to a close. But as ever, if a man knows his stuff, it's certainly this one. Yeah. And Phil, you can take your bus pass when you're...
Yeah, thanks ever so much.
They'll take your one. So what was I going to say? Here we are now joined today by former MEP Belinda de Lucy and Assistant Editor-in-Chief of the London Financial. That's Andy MacDonald. So interesting stuff there. That's why we always get Professor Curtis on, because he gives you a comprehensive overview. So when people are spinning the facts to look better than they are, he's given us a good overview. But reform, how are they going to do? What is going to happen? Can they really challenge the Conservative Party? Fewer than 500 candidates, he said.
Well, we're a very new party. For us to have a network of candidates up and down the country in just a couple of years, is unrealistic. So producing around 500 is actually not bad going. And I think Reform UK are also really focusing on the next general election as well. And we just need a bit more time.
So what's good for you then at these local elections? What would be good?
Well, I think it's interesting that Sir John was mentioning the rural areas, because there has been polling in the rural areas, and Reform UK is showing promise in those sort of Tory grassroots areas. It's just, as you said, whether we have enough candidates to fill them all, and that actually is a benefit to the Conservatives if we don't, but we are trying to increase it. So, yes, of course, we'd love 500 councillors being voted in. That would be amazing. I actually think we'll do better than expected, because there are a lot of people who just refuse to reward the Tories or Conservatives with a vote, and they want that other option.
And I guess that's the difference there. Expectations might be low for reform, but they're going to be high for Labour. People will be expecting big returns there for Labour, but set against this backdrop could be more difficult than Labour think.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of kind of city areas, metropolitan areas where Labour generally have the council stronghold because of a variety of factors, aren't having their local elections in this round. But a lot of red wall seats that were lost in 2019 and 2017 are in fact across Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire. For example, Mansfield, where I'm from, they've got a Labour mayor and a Labour minority council, and they're looking pretty strong. But in a lot of these areas, it's not really going to be the Labour Party or the Conservative Party, but independent groups like Ashfield Independents. They have control of the council in Ashfield. And I think they're a valid third option for many people who are tired of the national kind of political strategy.
Can I ask you, who really are the independents? Are they just people who don't want to say who they are? So in some rural areas, they could be Labour. They just know that they couldn't be voted, so they're going in as independent. Is it disaffected Conservatives? Are they truly independent? Who is this cluster of independents?
Well, it's always that thing. For a long time, particularly in ex-mining areas, the independent forum were Conservatives who were too scared to stand as Conservatives. But now you're actually finding it's maybe the flip side of it. People who are too scared to stand as Labour are standing as independents. But, Keir Starmer, he sent out the shadow cabinet. He's assigned them all to different constituencies that he sees as key to win at councils. So, the National Office of the Labour Party are taking this seriously.
Andy, we've obviously started off with the local election campaign, and we've got the tweets from the Labour Party today with their personal attack of Rishi Sunak and about the conviction of people who commit sexual assaults. What do you make of that tweet?
It's caused quite a kerfuffle in the Labour Party, at least, because you've got MPs like John McDonnell and the Socialist Campaign Group who have condemned it, but then a lot of kind of key Starmerites who sit more to the centre of the party are really behind it. I think we're using the Conservative... I say we, the Labour Party, are using the Conservative strategy against the Conservatives. It's just a shame that they used it on this specific issue. Grooming gangs are, really quite a hot topic at the minute in the media. It's being discussed lots, and the Labour Party have kind of used this to kind of score political points. I think this is an indicator that the Labour Party are getting ready for the spin of a general election. They're really starting to get quite aggressive. But can I just add that I don't think it's too dissimilar to Boris Johnson's kind of attack in the House of Commons to Keir Starmer over the Jimmy Savile comments when he was Director of Public Prosecutions.
But, Belinda, what do you make of it? On the one hand, of course, sentences are carried out by judges, not by politicians. And so, you know, the maximum sentence, I think, for these offences is 14 years. It's not the politicians who didn't send them to prison, it's the judges, which the Labour Party will know. But on the other hand, this is the kerfuffle that there's been over all of this. Is if they just put out a tame tweet, nobody would have noticed it and said anything. By doing it this way, they've really drawn attention to these figures, and they may get some political benefit.
So do you think it's successful then, Phil?
In that sense, it could be quite a clever thing to have done, isn't it?
It's great that the figures are now out there. I don't think anyone can argue that it's absolutely awful that so many have gone without prison sentences for sexually assaulting children. But I think this is a big mistake by Labour, and I think it will backfire. There is
Why
a nasty...
and how?
Because I think as soon as you associate politicians with defending paedophiles in any way, in an advert that's going to go up and down the country for a campaign. So it is slightly different, very different, actually, to Boris mentioning it in Parliament. This is a campaign that people aren't going to necessarily know that Rishi wasn't even Prime Minister, wasn't even in politics back in 2010 when the report goes back to. I think he was a banker back then. And to make that link between a politician and defending paedophiles in a campaign, I think is...
No, Andy mentioned there, you know, it shows that they're getting ready for a general election. So what I would ask then, the question is, should everybody watch out? Does this sort of show the sort of attacks, the sort of campaign we're going for? Is this so desperate to win Labour, they'll do anything?
Yeah, well, I think this is worrying that the bar is now so low. The need for hits and for, as you said, people to get excited about new headlines is so desperate now. Are they really going to start connecting politicians who have done nothing and verbally done nothing to suggest they defend paedophiles and now in campaign posters? I think it's really low, dirty tactic.
So desperate or clever, Andy?
I'd say pretty clever, because, you know, the fact that we're discussing it here, it's had its desired effect. You know, it's cutting through the noise almost. You know, we're discussing Labour Party tactics on GB News. You know, that's the point of it, to be discussed in the media. You know, I think it's a shame that they chose this specific topic, but I'm sure that they'll apply it to a variety of different policies across, you know, social, cultural and fiscal areas. And, you know, the Conservatives are known for having the slick graphics, particularly Rishi Sunak. You know, he runs a pretty good campaign when he was running for leader. You know, the Labour Party office, you know, Morgan McSweeney, the Director of Campaigns, he's seen that works, that appeals to people, and it cuts through the noise, and he's applied it, and now everyone's having a bit of a fit over it.
Now, Andy, we spoke to Neil Parish earlier, former Conservative MP, who obviously had to resign after a scandal and obviously was in the eye of a media storm about what's happening to Scott Benton at the moment after the Times sting. Do you have any sympathy on a personal level for what Scott Benton might be going through over the last couple of days? And his family and his staff and all the rest of it?
Well, yeah, of course. You know, nobody, you know, really wants to experience that, particularly one's family, who have actually done nothing wrong. His family, his loved ones and his friends, you know, they weren't involved. But, you know, I was in the Red Lion when this story dropped, and everyone was like, oh, my God.
Explain what the Red Lion is.
The Red Lion is the big pub in Westminster. It's just opposite the Cabinet Office, all the political
Where all
hacks,
the gossip is
all
going
the gossip
on.
Everybody's
goes on. Chatting. They've had a few drinks, and trust me, tongues are loose, so what was being said?
But other pubs are available. But, yeah...
But not to you, not on that
me.
night.
But, yeah, it was kind of the general consensus was he's finished. Because he's a 2019 intake MP, generally seen as one of the Brexit effect MPs. He's only got a 3,690 majority, and he's been caught on camera saying that he'll violate parliamentary procedure. That's not a good look.
When you say he's finished, as the MP for sort of Blackpool there, or in politics full stop, what do you mean he's finished?
I would say probably both, actually, because I doubt that he'll get reselected as a Conservative MP by his local association. And I'm not sure whether he'll resign, but I'm pretty sure he'll get suspension, unknown for how long, though.
Now, Belinda, we were saying that Phil got this letter as well. So what I'm wondering, because Scott had no history of doing anything wrong. It wasn't like an investigation into somebody. It was a sting.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Was this good journalism? Is this what we're, you know, or was this entrapment?
I do think a bit of both. It's like leaving breadcrumbs for this poor chap, Scott, to follow. I don't think he necessarily would have done it at all without the tease, without the dangling carrot. So, yes, it was a sting, but maybe it's important to show the vulnerabilities of maybe our younger MPs as well, that perhaps don't have the experience of how to deal with these scam emails. I do think it's important he's held to account. It's one of the things in the EU Parliament we stood up and talked about a lot, is the sort of bags of cash for advantages. And you know, we had that with Qatargate in the EU Parliament recently.
Vulnerable MP in a vulnerable, you know, seat. Was he thinking, so what is my job after politics?
Oh, I'm not quite sure. I just feel that in this day and age of social media, where you make one mistake, the public humiliation that is snapped there in a millisecond across the internet, your face listening to you, all your friends and family seeing you do this. It's like we can't make mistakes anymore or say sorry and recover very quickly. This is a lifetime big scar, I think, he's had to his career, very sadly.
Belinda, thank you very much indeed. And Andy, we'll see you in the next hour. Still ahead, royal biographer Angela Levin on whether the monarchy should be airing its historical dirty laundry after Buckingham Palace says it supports a study linking the royals to the slave trade.
And don't miss Ian Paisley Jr. MP looking back, of course, on the legacy of his father, the former First Minister of Northern Ireland, on the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, which he, of course, was wholly opposed to. Never.
And the other thing, if you're in a queue and you're going on holiday, please send us a photo, send us videos, get in touch. You know where to email them to. Don't go anywhere.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil here on GB News on this Good Friday.
On the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Peace Agreement, we'll be talking to DUP MP Ian Paisley Jr.
And Labour's been tweeting up a storm. We'll be joined by esteemed journalist Michael Crick to explain and bring you the very latest on that story.
And what exactly is going on with Macron and the raging streets of Paris? Defence editor for the Daily Telegraph, Con Coughlin, will bring us the very latest.
And as ever this morning, we want to hear from you, so get involved in the show. Email us at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews.
Now, France might be on fire, but before all of that, we're going to go to somebody who is always on fire. You're going to get the latest headlines from Tatiana.
Phil, thank you very much and good morning. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. Police in Northern Ireland are warning their officers could be targeted by dissidents in Londonderry this Easter. That's ahead of a state visit by US President Joe Biden arriving in Belfast on Tuesday. The PSNI says it's received strong intelligence attacks are being planned for Bank Holiday Monday. MI5 raised the terrorism threat level in the country to severe following the shooting of senior detective John Caldwell. Political commentator Nigel Nelson told GB News Northern Ireland has seen relative peace over a quarter of a century, showing what an achievement the agreement was.
When it comes to Republican supporters, there are probably about as many in Northern Ireland now as there were during the Troubles. The new IRA doesn't have the capability of, say, launching mainland attacks. But they're obviously, as we can see by the various attacks they've carried out in Northern Ireland, they're hugely dangerous. So, yes, it is a tricky time, but it's a lot better than it was 25 years ago.
A 12-year-old boy has been charged with the murder of a woman who died after being hit by a car. 60-year-old Marcia Grant was hit by the car in the Greenhill area of Sheffield on Wednesday evening. South Yorkshire Police have said the boy, who cannot be identified for legal reasons, will appear before Sheffield Youth Court tomorrow. The Labour Party has stood by an ad claiming that Rishi Sunak doesn't think child sex abusers should go to prison. The advert, posted on Twitter, has drawn criticism from MPs. Senior Tory ministers accused the party of a vile and desperate campaign strategy. Labour posted the ad pitching itself as the party of law and order. But Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell told us it's similar to the types of graphics the PM uses.
The digital graphic that's based on, it's like a skit if you like, or a take on the types of graphics that the Prime Minister himself produces about his own policies, and he's become famous for producing these kind of graphics. And so it's a take on that. If it's personal in the sense that he's the guy who runs the country. He is the Prime Minister, and the book does stop with him.
2 million British holidaymakers are expected to head overseas this Easter weekend. Travel organisation APTA says people are seeking sunshine, booking trips to places like Spain, Greece and the Canaries. Data company Cirium says more than 10,000 flights are scheduled to leave the UK, 13% below pre-pandemic travel. Meanwhile, the Port of Dover is warning holidaymakers could face 2-hour delays this Easter weekend. Ferry operator DFDS urged travellers to allow 120 minutes to complete border controls and check-in. Delays have been blamed on French officials carrying out extra checks, as well as stamping UK passports following Brexit. A man has been arrested on suspicion of murder after one person died during a fire at a block of flats in East London. The Met Police said officers were called to the blaze in Newham, along with the London Ambulance Service and London Fire Brigade. The victim, believed to be a woman, has not been named. 5 others were taken to hospital following the fire. Police are investigating. Protesters continue to demonstrate in Paris against the proposed pension bill. Demonstrators set fire to one of President Emmanuel Macron's favourite restaurants and clashed with riot police. Crowds have been gathering since January against the reform, which would lift the retirement age by 2 years to 64. Union leaders warn the only way out of the crisis is for the legislation to be withdrawn. The UK has appealed for de-escalation as Israel's military hit sites in Gaza early this morning. It's in retaliation for rocket attacks it blamed on the Islamist group Hamas. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says both sides in the Israel-Palestine dispute should negotiate and de-escalate tensions. Video released by the Israeli army shows explosions on what it said were 10 targets, including Hamas weapon production sites and tunnels. And Easter Sunday could be the warmest day of the year so far, with highs of up to 18 degrees. Temperatures could top 16 or 17 degrees Celsius in some parts of the UK today, as the sun puts its hat on for Easter. The Met Office says the weather is set to be fine and relatively nice this weekend, before rain for most places on Bank Holiday Monday. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Esther and Bill.
Thank you, Tatiana. Now, a tweet posted by the Labour Party is causing sparks to fly this bank holiday. The tweet says, under the Tories, 4,500 adults convicted of sexually assaulting children under 16 served no prison time. It sparked controversy by saying that the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, doesn't want those offenders to be sent to prison. Earlier on the breakfast show, Stephen and Dawn spoke to Shadow Culture Secretary Lucy Powell. They asked her if she thought Keir Starmer should apologise.
No, I don't think he should apologise. These are election graphics. These are political graphics, which, as I say, are not something that I designed or wrote. Well, look, they're not my words. They're not words I've chosen. But what I am saying to you, as somebody who's been asked to talk about the issues that we are highlighting today, regards to these huge figures that we are unveiling, is that these serious offenders, some of them are not getting the custodial sentences that they should be.
But first, as we mark the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, police in Northern Ireland are warning of dissident Republic disorder over the Easter weekend.
For more on both of our top stories, joining us now is esteemed broadcaster and journalist Michael Crick. Michael, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let's start, if we can, with Northern Ireland. How worried do you think that we should be about what's going on in Northern Ireland, not just with these threats of violence on Easter Monday, but also just generally with the Assembly not sitting and the fallout from the Windsor framework?
Well, the situation has been getting worse in terms of the threat level for quite a while now. And fortunately, the number of... there was the terrible attack, of course, on Detective John Caldwell, but it hasn't got worse than that. The security services have been superb at keeping things in check, but there are huge tensions behind the scenes, and not just over the anniversary, of course, but over the Northern Ireland Protocol and all of that row, and the fact that the Assembly is not sitting and so on. But I suppose it's inevitable as we face the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, which essentially has brought peace to Northern Ireland for the last quarter of a century, and we should be, all of us, I think, celebrating that. Then it's inevitable that you will get some extremists who are planning to disrupt all of that at a time when the Northern Ireland is going to be host to some really important figures, not least Joe Biden. So it's a nervous time, and let's hope we can. It will be a peaceful time, but it is, the threat, I think, from what the security services are saying, is very real.
Michael, moving on to the other story that's unfolding as we're live on air, and that's the Labour tweet there and what they'd said about Rishi Sunak and what they're sort of raising the issues about who hasn't been sent to prison. So is this a clever move or is this a mistake? We saw Lucy Powell there saying that Keir Starmer won't apologise.
Well, I think it's a disgusting ad. I think it's disgraceful. It is dragging politics down, not to the gutter, but to the sewer, frankly. I mean, the ad is a lie for a start. It says that Rishi Sunak thinks that doesn't think that adults convicted of sexually assaulting children should go to prison. Well, clearly Rishi Sunak doesn't think that. Rishi Sunak thinks they should go to prison. And it's also highly dishonest in that it suggests that whether people go to prison or not is a matter for the government. It isn't. When a case comes to trial, as Starmer knows better than anybody, he was the Director of Public Prosecutions. If somebody is convicted, it's up to the judge to decide what the sentence should be. But in a way, the fact that we're discussing this now and everybody has been discussing it on Twitter, and a lot of Labour people have condemned it on Twitter. And it's clear, by the way, that from what Lucy Powell was saying to you earlier, that she doesn't think much of it either. But that's probably what the people behind this ad wanted. They wanted to cause a fuss, to put up a controversial ad that frankly tells lies, and get everybody talking about it. And then, of course, the ad gets a lot more currency than it would if they just put it up on its own. It's an old trick. Having said that, your party, the Conservatives, have done some pretty awful ads like this in the past, and I've condemned those as well. I remember during the London
Is there a difference
election
here, though, who comes out angry? If the Conservatives had have done that tweet, would the left be up in arms and be everywhere? Do the Conservatives sometimes let these things ride?
Yeah, the left would be up in arms if the Conservative did that. And indeed, the left, part of the left is up in arms right now. The left of the Labour Party is up in arms against Starmer and the right of the Labour Party for doing that ad. So it's complicated. But I have to say, in the London mayoral elections, Sean Bailey's campaign put out an ad masquerading as a letter from Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, telling London voters that their council tax would be going up hugely. And which was again was a lie by the Conservative Party, and I condemned it at the time. The trouble is, every time somebody does something like this, the other side retaliate with something worse, and our political discourse degenerates. And it seems to me that politics is the only area of our public life where you're allowed to tell lies in your advertising, and there's no sanction. There is no body that can regulate advertising like this. If a company did it for its products, it would be up against the advertising
Well,
standards
that's why
authority.
it's strange. Twitter have corrected it on sort of the Twitter sphere, but Labour can't correct it. It's quite peculiar. We were talking about this before.
Do you think, though, Michael, just getting down to, do you think this will benefit Labour politically, or do you think it will harm them politically? Taking out whether it's right or wrong or indifferent, do you think this will benefit them or harm them?
I think that amongst some of its strongest members and supporters, it will disgust leading Labour people who are Labour activists. I think it will discuss a lot of them with the desperate nature, really, of the win at all costs Starmer regime. But my fear is that amongst the wider electorate, the very fact we're discussing it now and everybody else is discussing it now will put that issue on the agenda and will actually help Labour in that way. They've put an issue on the agenda through telling lies, essentially, through dishonest means. And we know that, Rishi Sunak doesn't think that. He's not like that. And it's painting him as an ogre and a person that he is not. He is a decent human being, a decent politician. And he clearly thinks that we should be tough on sex offenders in the same way that everybody else does.
Michael Crick, as ever, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate your insight and forthright opinions, as always. Thank you.
Who'd have thought Keir would be going all Trump and getting all these things out on Twitter and doing a Twitter storm and doing a Twitter frenzy and saying what he wants?
It may well work politically, and that's at the end of the day what it's all about, isn't it? Now, a quarter of a century on from the historic signing of the Good Friday Agreement, which is credited with securing peace in Northern Ireland, where are we now?
Well, this morning we're delighted to be joined by Ian Paisley Jr., a senior DUP member of Parliament whose father was personally involved in the initial negotiations. So we hope Hiya, good morning.
So, Ian, 25 years on, what is your... I mean, the DUP, your dad was famously opposed to the Good Friday Agreement, never It has been credited with giving Northern Ireland peace and stability. So looking back on it now, what's your thoughts about the Good Friday Agreement 25 years on?
Well, I think there are a couple of very important things. People often refer to this as a peace agreement and the delivery of peace. And if there hadn't been the Belfast Agreement, there wouldn't have been peace. But we have to be absolutely clear about this. The people of Northern Ireland were entitled to peace. It was a right. And the idea that they had to sit down and make an agreement with the men of violence and with terrorism in order to have peace, and the terrorists had to get some win in that process, has always, I think, jarred with people in Northern Ireland, because having peace is a right. The war was illegal. The activities of the IRA were wrong. Things that they were doing should not have ever been done on any people. And the reprisals and all the rest of the violence which flowed from it was entirely wrong. And it shouldn't have happened. And unfortunately, we had a process which ended up saying, well, now that you've been engaged in violence, to get you off violence will guarantee your political masters a place in government forever. And that's essentially what has happened over the last 25 years. Now, I welcome peace. Only a fool would not welcome peace. We're entitled to it. What we need to have is political stability. And the institutions that have flowed from the Belfast Agreement have not been stable. For about 40% of the time of the last 25 years, they haven't functioned properly. And we've got to try and get to a point where they do function properly. And that only will happen if we've got good, stable political leadership, and leadership that recognises that you've got essentially two tribes in Northern Ireland, and they've got to work together and try and find a way through the morass that has arisen and continues
Ian,
to arise.
what do you make of the breaking news about the IRA terror threat ahead of the Biden visit?
Well, Esther, I'm not surprised by it. Terrorism hasn't gone away. We have had serious threats on the lives of police officers over the last 25 years. We've had a number of them murdered. In recent weeks, there was an attempt to murder a senior police officer here, as you know. So that terrorism threat has never gone away. People like me and other public representatives live under a constant threat of terrorist violence still in Northern Ireland, despite the fact that people say you've got peace and stability. We have certainly a better situation than we had 25, 26 years ago, but we still do have this cloud of men of violence and gangs affiliated with republicanism and with other groupings who
And
are
what
still
about
prepared
the
to be engaged
police?
in violence. And I think the fact that we've got the highest terrorist threat in the UK is a clear indication that a lot more work has got to be done, because 25 years after the so-called peace agreement, we're still dealing with the legacy, the long-tail legacy of that process.
And what do you think of the police releasing this information? What does that say to you, that the police have given such information out?
Well, I actually welcome the fact that they're transparent. They're not trying to hide it. The fact of the matter is that people should be alert in Northern Ireland. They should be alert to the potential violence and the potential threat that is there, and the actual threat that is there. And they should make sure that they are alert. I mean, you'll know when you're in the tubes in London, you will regularly get calls. If you see anything, call it out and go to the right person and make that call and identify it. Well, in Northern Ireland, having been alert at all times to those threats is absolutely necessary. So I'm actually pleased that the police have done it, and it does indicate, and I think the police are being very clever here, the police are underpowered in Northern Ireland by about 2,000 officers. They need at least another 1,000 to 2,000 officers. The budget hasn't been put in place. Mr Chris Heaton-Harris hasn't given a budget to Northern Ireland to allow us to address this police shortage, and I think the police are saying, you're about to have a presidential visit in Northern Ireland. Here's a major terrorism threat. We're at the highest levels of security danger, and we don't have enough police officers. I think the police are being very clever at doing that and highlighting the fact that they need officers.
Ian, just finally, we're 25 years on from the Good Friday Agreement, and here we are back in another constitutional crisis with your party not taking its seats in the Northern Ireland Assembly in objection to the Windsor Framework. That's now passed. It's gone through Parliament. It's been introduced. What's going to happen? I mean, are the DUP going to stay out of the Assembly in perpetuity, or are you going to go back in at some point?
Well, you wouldn't expect my party to operate a political institution that was ultimately leading to the destruction of Northern Ireland's place in the Union. That's the position that we have a mandate for, that we shouldn't be in that institution as long as these issues pertain. They've got to be fixed. The protocol was passed by equally large numbers, and the government recognised ultimately that had to change. They need to continue this work and get significant changes and make the process function in a way that removes the threat that unionists feel that they're being pushed out of the union. I mean, you wouldn't accept it if I were to say that goods that travel from Yorkshire to London have to have travel documents attached to them, that they're treated as if they're a third country part. But even the Green Lane that Mr Sunak told us was operational now between Northern Ireland, every single lorry using that Green Lane will have to have customs declarations for the goods upon them travelling from any part of the UK to Northern Ireland. That is not acceptable. We are not some third country. We are part and parcel of the United Kingdom and should be treated as such.
Ian Paisley Jr., thank you very much indeed for joining us today. And it's always great to reminisce about your dad, who was a great friend of mine in Parliament when I first got elected and was very kind to me. So.
And I remember you coming to his big celebratory party.
I did. I felt.
We're going down memory lane now.
I felt very honoured to be invited. He was very good to me when I first got elected, so it's always great to reminisce about him.
You're a very good friend of his, so thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Thank you
very much. And we've got some views coming in here. Gary says this is about the Northern Ireland trouble. They're straight on the back of that interview. Who didn't know there would be trouble or threat of trouble in Northern Ireland because of Brexit not being done properly or done at all? Here we go again.
Well, it's worrying times in Northern Ireland.
So we hope you're enjoying this Good Friday morning so far, and we want to hear from you about your Easter plans. So do get in touch. Are those Easter plans still in place, or are you caught in a queue somewhere, maybe at Dover? So send us those stories or maybe a video to gbnews@gbnews.uk.
Plenty more still to come on Friday morning with Esther and Phil, including getting to the heart of today's top stories with our esteemed presenter friends Belinda DeLucy and Andy McDonald. And if you're about to pop out, don't forget you can take us with you on radio, so keep listening to us on GB News Radio 2. See you soon.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 11:27. This is Friday morning with Esther and Philip.
You'll have seen shocking footage of riots on the streets of Paris. You'd be forgiven for wondering where on earth the French president is.
Well, 3 years after his last visit to China, Emmanuel Macron is back there for a 3-day official visit.
Presidents Macron and Xi Jinping have been discussing the ongoing war in Ukraine, amongst other things.
So joining us now to discuss this is Con Coughlin, the defence editor for the Daily Telegraph. Thanks for joining us this morning. So what do you make of Macron's visit, running away from what's happening at home to try and do something abroad?
Well, I think it's a classic exercise in French opportunism, frankly. We are facing a massive crisis here in Europe with the war in Ukraine. One of the factors in this war is China's support for Russia. And without that support, one wonders whether Putin could continue the war. But following the summit last month between President Xi Jinping of China and Vladimir Putin in Moscow, the two countries are fairly clearly aligned. So why on earth is the French president going to Beijing? Well, he's going there actually to develop trade ties with between France and China, which to my mind is an utter betrayal of European solidarity on the Ukraine issue. I don't see how you can go and do a trade deal with China at a time when China is backing Russia in Ukraine.
Gone alone, has he? I mean, Ursula von der Leyen's there with him. So you've got sort of an EU support, even if they seem to be playing a secondary role to Macron's visit, which he arranged.
Well, this is even more humiliating. I mean, you've got the president of the European Commission riding on the coattails of a French president. I mean, if the EU stands for anything, it should be the other way round. But this, such is France's dominance of the EU that he's managed to persuade von der Leyen to go along with him. And like Macron, she's under this mad illusion that by being nice to Xi, she can persuade him to change his mind on Russia. Well, I think from Xi's perspective, from Beijing's perspective, the fact you've got these so-called powerful European leaders going to Beijing suggests they're in a weak position. Frankly, this is a job for diplomats, not presidents.
Do you not think there's something in Macron going, though, and saying, look, we all want to see an end to the war in Ukraine, and as you identified, China could play a pivotal role in persuading Russia to end that war. Is Macron not onto something by saying, look, let's go to China, let's put some pressure on them, and they might be the people who can actually stop this war in Ukraine?
Well, I mean, I think putting pressure on China to end its support for Russia is a valid exercise. As I just said, in my view, this is a job for diplomats, not presidents. By making official visits at this level, you are almost demonstrating how desperate you are for China to do something. And Beijing will just sit there and grin and take it all in and say, well, this just confirms that I'm in a very powerful position when the head of the EU and the president of France come here with a begging bowl asking for my help. So, no, I don't think this is the way to go about it. And of course, we've seen how this can end in humiliation from Macron's experience of dealing with Putin last year. We'll all remember those images of Putin sitting, about 4 tables lengths away from the French president, and nothing came of it. And all that really came of it was that divisions appeared within the European alliance, within the NATO alliance, which just encouraged Putin to continue the war. So, I'm very sceptical about the effectiveness of this kind of visit, particularly, as I said at the start of this conversation, that Macron's real aim is to develop business ties with China.
Yeah. So, Con, what do you think Macron should be doing then to strengthen the European power, or however he's going to do that, to stop this war in Ukraine? What do you think? How do you think his time would be best spent?
Well, I think his time would be better spent making sure that the Europeans within the NATO alliance remain united, that the European element of NATO makes sure that Ukraine has the weapons it needs to prevail on the battlefield, because it is in Europe's interest that Ukraine wins this war. But at the moment, the Europeans are dragging their feet in terms of giving Ukraine the weapons they need to win. And so long as that goes on, Putin will be encouraged to believe that he can win this war, and the Chinese will continue to back him.
Coughlin, thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
Maybe Macron should be at home trying to sort out all the riots across the country. Maybe that's what he should be doing.
That's what I started off. Is this running away from the disaster at home to try and distract from what you can't solve at home?
Get the headlines away from the riots.
Well, plenty more still to come on Friday morning with Esther and Phil, including getting to the heart of today's top stories with our esteemed presenters friends Belinda DeLucy and Andy MacDonald. And if you're about to pop out, don't forget to take us with you. Keep listening to GB News on the radio, and don't forget to get in touch with your views at gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, let's get the latest headlines from Tatiana Sanchez.
Esther, thank you very much. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. Police in Northern Ireland are warning their officers could be targeted by dissidents in Londonderry this Easter. That's ahead of a state visit by US President Joe Biden arriving in Belfast on Tuesday. The PSNI says it's received strong intelligence attacks are being planned for Bank Holiday Monday. MI5 raised the terrorism threat level in the country to severe following the shooting of senior detective John Caldwell. The Labour Party has stood by an ad claiming that Rishi Sunak doesn't think child sex abusers should go to prison. The advert, posted by the party on Twitter, has drawn criticism from MPs. A senior Tory minister has accused Labour of a vile and desperate campaign strategy. The UK has appealed for de-escalation as Israel's military hit sites in Gaza early this morning. It's in retaliation for rocket attacks it's blamed on the Islamist group Hamas. Video released by the Israeli army shows explosions on what it said were 10 targets, including Hamas weapon production sites and tunnels. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says both sides in the dispute should negotiate and de-escalate tensions. 2 million British holidaymakers are expected to head overseas this Easter weekend. Travel organisation ABTA says people are seeking sunshine, booking trips to places like Spain and Greece. Data company Cirium says more than 10,000 flights are scheduled to leave the UK, 13% below pre-pandemic travel. And temperatures could top 16 or 17 degrees Celsius in some parts of the UK today as the sun puts its hat on for Easter. The Met Office says the weather is set to be fine and relatively nice this weekend before rain for most places on Bank Holiday Monday. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2434 and 1.1401 euros. The price of gold is £1,615 and 9 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,741 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
Thanks so very much, Tatiana, there. Now you're watching Friday Morning with Esther and Phil. Next up, should the King Charles be airing the royal family's dirty historical laundry? Well, to tell you some more about that in a few moments' time, we'll be speaking to royal biographer Tom Bower. So don't go anywhere.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are. We don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to Friday Morning with Esther and Phil. It's 11:39. Now, King Charles has signalled his support for research into the monarchy's links with the slave trade for the first time.
It comes as an American historian unearths a document revealing one of his predecessors had shares in a transatlantic slaving firm.
Buckingham Palace said Charles took the issue of his family links to slavery profoundly seriously. So joining us now to discuss this is royal biographer Tom Bower. So as Charles now looks back into this historic connections with slavery, is this to acknowledge it? Is it to apologise for it? And if he apologises for it, will there be calls for reparations, for payments? Is this a dangerous path Charles is going down?
Well, I don't think it's dangerous. I think it's the right thing to do, because he can't say, don't research the royal family's past. I think that he's done the right thing. I mean, it's very important to know the truth, and there's nothing wrong with discovering whether 300 years ago the royal family had any connections with slavery. The whole point about this issue is to put it into context. It's 300 years ago, and at that time slavery was quite normal. The Ottoman Empire, the Turkish Empire across the Middle East, was constantly raiding Europe and snatching Europeans and taking them off the Ottoman Empire as slaves. Arab pirates were raiding Cornwall in England, and kidnapping Englishmen and taking them to North Africa, especially to Tunisia. Slavery in Africa and across the Arab world was quite normal, as it is to this day. So there's nothing wrong in researching the history and patterns of slavery. Is what happens when you discover the truth. And that is really the problem with this whole investigation into the past.
So what will happen? You're talking about putting it into context. Do you think there'll be calls that won't want it to be in context, that are going to have to say you must pay for your past acts?
Well, of course there is. And the whole point of this inquiry, investigation, is it's political. The people who are masterminding this investigation into the past want to use slavery 300 years ago, but not the Roman Empire slavery, not the Greek Empire slavery, not the Arab kingdom slavery, but British slavery, as a political weapon to undermine our liberal democracy. They're not doing it because they somehow want to discover historical facts. They're doing it to destabilize the democracy and the people who now rule Britain or influence Britain. And that's what's wrong with it. But you know, I don't think that it's dangerous. I think that what's very important is to put it all into context and to actually confront those who are trying to use this 300-year-old historical event, which of course was terrible, no doubt about it in the modern context, but 300 years ago apparently is quite usual and quite normal. They mustn't be allowed to use it to undermine our society today. They've got to be confronted with one particular unfortunate truth, that slavery is historic. It has nothing to do with how we live today.
Tom, I was speculated earlier, I'd be interested in your thoughts, that the royal family seem to be going quite woke. We've got this, obviously, Charles going down this slave trade route, which may or may not come back to bite him. But also had William and Kate, who appointed Jacinda Ardern to their Earthshot Prize board. She's obviously been a very divisive figure, not least over the rules she imposed on COVID, and they've praised her commitment to sustainability and climate change and whatnot. Is the royal family in danger of getting a bit too woke and political here?
Well, I don't think so. I think that the royal family has to actually reflect what is a current issue, which is climate change and green issues, and also slavery. It's an important issue. The question is the context. I mean, Charles, the last thing that Charles is woke. He understands the history about slavery very well. He knows that the people who are pioneering this slavery issue are...
Have we lost Tom's sound there?
I think we have.
If we have,
confess their guilt.
Here we go. I've got a sound back. Tom, we lost you for a second there, but it seems you're back with us, so thank you.
Okay, well, what I was saying was that the people who are pioneering this agenda on slavery, as on the climate change very often and wokery, want to somehow stage show trials, the same as was done in communist Europe and the Soviet Union before the collapse of communism, where people are paraded in court and have to admit to crimes which they didn't commit. And slavery is not a crime which Prince Charles or King Charles committed. But the proponents of all this investigation, just like the Guardian newspaper, want to somehow frame the royal family and all Britons as guilty. It's an issue which in the end will be resolved to the advantage of the liberal democracy, but it is in the end, it is racist. And we just must admit slavery was awful. It was 300 years ago. Yeah. And it has really nothing to do with the reality today, but we should discover the truth.
Yeah. And people, you know, again, will say people who are pushing for this are really don't like sort of the country as such and aren't particularly patriotic. But Tom Bauer, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. We'll come back into the studio here now. We've still got Belinda DeLucia here. We've still got Andy MacDonald here. So thank you very much indeed. So what do you think about that? Why is Charles going down this path? Is it a big mistake? As this story unfolds, will he think, oh, my goodness, how did I get here? I thought I was putting it in context. Tom kept saying that, put it in context, put it in context. Will it? Or will it just be people clambering for repayments?
I think it's a big mistake for Charles to refocus his energy onto sort of social justice causes rather than the duty to Crown and Country. We saw that with our Queen. You know, she was utterly dedicated to Crown and Country. I don't think she would have necessarily gone down this route in a climate that King Charles knows this climate is against him at the moment and knows that anything dug up will be used against him. So we have to trust that he has the weapons to fight with it. Because to be honest...
The United Kingdom and Germany.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, I don't believe in inherited guilt at all. I think it's a ridiculous concept that people are blamed for things that they haven't committed.
Well, the law
so Charles
always
mustn't
says
go down that
you
road.
can't judge.
Well, exactly.
You can't judge
so
what you know now on what was happened in the past. I mean, it's always said that. I was just intrigued that it was somebody doing a PhD and the royal family have given them absolute full use of all of their historical data. I was intrigued by that. Why did they go down that route? Because somebody was doing a PhD into the Royal African Company being set up?
Well, I think, you know, it's quite interesting. You know, the monarchy are a public institution and somebody researching into their history should be allowed to have a look. I don't know about full access because I don't know what's there, but I think it's quite interesting. You know, Charles has been waiting to be king for quite a long time, but I don't think he was waiting 300 years. So I don't quite see why he should get the blame. But, you know, it fits into a wider narrative that we've seen from King Charles throughout his kind of entire life when he was a prince. You know, he was very involved in environmental stuff, you know, New Age architecture, you know, the slimming down of the monarchy. I wouldn't say woke, but I'd say he's fitting into a wider progressive narrative that he's hoping to bring to the monarchy, because it's always said that the monarchy should be reflective of its people. More and more people are becoming concerned about things like climate change, about, you know, slimming down the monarchy, about, you know, historical ties to slavery. And I think it's quite a positive thing to see a fresh face within the, well, not a fresh face, but a fresh approach from the royal family.
If and when it comes out after this study's done, 3 years, I think it's going to take, for some reason, the royal family were involved in the slave trade directly or indirectly, inevitably, everyone's going to say, oh, well, they should do what Laura Trevelyan's family's done and they should pay reparations. Should the royal family pay reparations if and when this study comes back and says, yes, there was some involvement? What's your view on that?
I don't think the royal family should, because at the end of the day, their kind of money is taxpayers' money, essentially, because they are, you know, the heart of the nation. You know, their money is our money, but it's different for private individuals to give reparations, because that's their own income and they can do whatever they want with it. But when
what would happen with the Catholics, for example? I mean, our monarchy, you know, raided all the beautiful religious monasteries of the Catholic and raided the Catholic families' purses. What, are we going to pay reparations to Catholics? Is the monarchy and aristocracy going to pay reparations to the peasantry that they've brutalised over centuries, in the first 1,000 years?
Knows? Who knows? Where it's
never ending.
This never-ending guilt seems to be where we're going. And it's victim, mea culpa, who do I pay back?
And they're trying to make it uniquely British evil. They just want to make out that the Brits were the evil ones and everyone else, let's not talk about their slavery. And that's why I hate the agenda behind this.
Now, we spoke earlier, Andy, to Michael Crick about the Labour Party tweet that's obviously high up in the news again today about the 4,500 people who committed sexual assaults hadn't been sent to prison, and Rishi Sunak, they claimed in this advert, didn't want those people to go to prison. Michael Crick was very, very harsh, really. He said this advert is disgusting. The Labour Party are not campaigning in the gutter, they're campaigning in the sewer. What did you make of what he said? That was quite strong words.
Yeah, that's pretty firm from Michael there. He's an esteemed figure. He's been around for a lot longer than me, and he's seen lots and lots of things, from various parties. But I do think he's got it wrong on this. I think it was designed for a specific purpose, probably not to win votes, but to kind of show that they're getting ready to break through the noise. Like I said on the earlier segment, it's being discussed here. It's works.
And by the way, he agreed with that as well. Yeah. So he separated the two things out. Yeah. He said it served its purpose. Yeah. Everybody's talking about it. You now know those figures, etc. But where you're going shows you'll stop at nothing. The Labour Party will stop at nothing at winning votes. So other parties should be very alert to that fact.
Yeah, I do. I think they've sort of carved out new territory as where this campaign is going. And do you remember the Labour poster? I think it was Tony Blair with devil eyes in the 1990s. And I remember being quite shocked as a young person that the Tory party would associate, even though I didn't like his politics necessarily, but Tony Blair with the actual devil. And I just think our politics should be better than that. And now it's gone even further into pretending that, politicians are defending paedophiles. And I don't think we need to be in the gutter. People need better politicians.
Do you think Lucy Powell was a bit embarrassed defending?
Michael Crick said he thought she was. Did you sense that? I don't know.
No, I don't know. Yeah, I can't speak to her individual emotions. I know lots of pundits have thought so, but I'm a member of the Labour Party. I stand by the advert. I think it's good that we finally got leadership that's ready to actually take the fight to the election. Because our previous leader, Mr. Corbyn, he was poor.
Our viewers are not quite in your camp here, it seems, Andy, with this. Alan says we can expect more of this gutter politics from Labour as both local and then the general election loom near. This tweet is a reflection of the type of spin and lies to expect from a left-wing party with nothing to offer other than extreme protest politics. And David says, whilst Labour may do well in the local elections, the general election is not yet a done deal. Starmer is clearly not an inspiring leader, and by the time of the general election, Sunak will have had the opportunity to make his mark.
And talking about desperate politicians, we saw Macron there abandoning France, all what's going on with the demonstrations, protests on the street over his pension, retirement age change. So, what should he be doing? Is this a desperate trip to China?
Oh, I think it's absolutely cringeworthy. Macron is puffing up his chest like a pigeon and peacocking on the international stage while his, home country literally burns. I think the protesters burnt down his favourite cafe just a few days ago. They targeted that, and he had his sort of Maori...
Can't blame those cafe owners, can you?
No, I know, it's awful. So I do think that does smack of that disconnected politician that quite a few European countries are suffering from. They're just obsessed with the international stage rather than the national applause that he should be seeking. And to be honest...
And not really standing with Ukraine if he was going out there to do trade deals for
it's
his
a fool's
own
errand.
business.
He knows full well he's not going to shift to any position of the Chinese. It's purely for his greedy, eager, business deal men in the back of the plane that can't wait to get a few deals in with the Chinese. It's not the right time, is what I'd say.
Andy, I'm just trying to think that... I'm not entirely sure how it would go down in the UK if there was riots all over the country and the Prime Minister decided to clear off out the country.
Well, you can imagine what the tweet would be then.
Absolutely.
I could write Labour's tweet now.
Absolutely.
So I'm just wondering, will this work for him politically, being seen to leave France when France is burning?
Well, I was in Denmark only a couple of weeks ago with some French trade unionists from the rail trade unions, and they were talking about he doesn't really need political support because, as you can see with the pension age legislation, he forced it through the Senate. You know, he didn't have the political support in there. He doesn't really care. He's got a couple of years until the next election. This will all blow over.
Right, we've got to say thank you to
Thank
you
you.
both for being great. Belinda, Andy, thank you very much indeed. And you know what? That's all we've got time for today. Up next, it's GB News Live with Mark Longhurst, and we'll be back tomorrow at 10 a.m. with a whole range of other topics, including one of your favourite ones there, Phil.
IPP sentencing, indeterminate sentences for public protection. I can bore people rigid about that.
Yeah, and you will.
And I will, but we'll be talking to the chairman of the Justice Select Committee, Bob Neal, about it, and he won't bore you about it.
Now it's time for the weather. Stay with us.
Hello, very good day to you. Plenty of fine sunny weather to be had as we go through the rest of this Good Friday. For most, it is going to be dry and sunny, and in that sunshine, feeling pleasantly warm. The reason for the settled weather is this area of high pressure. It's going to bring largely dry conditions to much of the UK as we go through the start of the long weekend, keeping this weather front largely at bay. But if we take a closer look as we go through Good Friday afternoon, you can see, yes, across the bulk of the UK, there will be largely sunny skies. A bit of cloud starting to push in from the North Sea, so some North Sea coastal parts will be a bit cloudier. And where there is the cloud, temperatures will be a little bit suppressed. So perhaps a touch chilly towards some North Sea coasts, but elsewhere where there's plenty of sunshine, feeling pleasantly warm with temperatures a nudge above average for the time of year. For most, there won't be a huge amount of change as we go through the evening, but some eastern parts are going to turn a bit cloudier as that cloud continues to push its way in from the North Sea. There may even be a few spots of drizzly rain as we go through the night. Otherwise, though, and further west where we have clear skies, it is again going to turn quite chilly, so perhaps a touch of frost, and watch out for some mist and fog patches, particularly across some southern parts first thing on Saturday morning. Otherwise, and as we go through Saturday, again for most, it's going to be largely dry. The best of the sunshine will be across western parts of Scotland, central western parts of England and Wales as well. Cloudier towards more eastern areas, still the chance of a little bit of rain around, perhaps some showers across East Anglia, but most will see some bright or sunny spells. Temperatures look